welcome to the latest episode of the Indoencers Podcast. Today we have a real creative powerhouse with us. You may know her as the lead singer for the globally renowned Berklee Indian Ensemble. Maybe you've seen her viral covers on Instagram, or maybe you've even checked out her newly released independent album called Ravaan. And this doesn't even start to cover all that she has achieved in the arts till date. She has vast experience as a singer, dancer, composer, vocal arranger, nonprofit founder. The list is genuinely endless. So enough of me blabbering for now, and let's welcome our guest today, the amazing multilingual vocalist, dancer, and mouth trumpeter, Sindhu Vasudevan. Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that incredible introduction. I don't know if I live up to all of that, but thank you.
See, everyone says this, and I get very annoyed. Like, this is you. Come on, own it. But anyways, today, we're here, hopefully for an hour and a half or so, just to sort of go through your journey and see the steps that you've taken to get to where you are today and see how that journey has sort of panned out till date. So let's go back to the very beginning and sort of go to the first chapter. You come from a family of creatives and artists, right? Your mother sings and dances. Your elder brother has been doing music. Your grandmother's a dancer. Your grandfather's a singer, as your Instagram followers would know, and so on. So could you tell me a little bit about your, earliest musical memories and the environment in which your earliest sort of musical explorations happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always say I was surrounded with music and dance growing up. Like you mentioned, my entire family has been very deeply rooted in the arts. I think that's where I also kind of learned to tie my culture and learn about my Indian culture that way, growing up in the US, far away from India. In terms of music, my grandfather and my brother and my mother were probably the three biggest pillars of my music foundation. My grandfather is actually an untrained musician completely, and I think that was kind of where I learned musical sincerity. I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background. But yeah, that's where I kind of learned about musical sincerity and just how much you devote yourself into any art for that matter. In terms of my brother, he was kind of the reason that I even began taking lessons. I would go with him, to his music lessons, and I ended up picking up a lot of the songs that he learned, and that's kind of how my parents realized, oh, okay, this one can kind of sing too. So that was kind of my introduction through my brother, and my mom has learned music and dance both growing up, so she was kind of the introduction to me performing and that kind of thing, although she never got the opportunity to do that full time or take it up super seriously. I think that was one of the biggest introductions that I had growing up, was those three people in my life. And then in terms of dance, my grandmother is an amazing dancer. I don't share as much of her on social media because she shies away from it. But she's an amazing dancer, and so is my mother. And that was kind of my introduction into dance. But growing up in the US, I think the main reason that I even got into music and dance was truly to connect with my culture, and a lot of that credit goes to my parents. And my dad is very artistic as well. I don't really publicize my dad as much, but he's equally artistic. He's not a performing artist, but he knows the ins and outs of audio engineering, and he has been the backbone of all of my concerts and everything. He's always there for a sound check. He's always there to help with everything that I need back end. So my dad is also an equal pillar of support for me throughout. So yeah, I think both of my parents have really just pushed that culture into me through the arts, and that's kind of how I got started.
That's super cool. I did not know that about your dad. You've sort of got both sides covered, the sort of the music side and the sort of tech side all within one family. That's super cool.
Yes.
And the story about your brother and, you accompanying him to classes really interests me because it ties into some of my own experiences where, I have an elder sister who studied Carnatic, and sadly I was not as, inspired early on because I would just tag along and then just run around instead of, sitting down and listening or whatever. But what about the sort of environment or the sort of music or whatever you experienced at your brother's lessons? What captivated you think?
To be honest, I don't really remember too much of it.
Fair enough.
I just remember going to his classes. I think I was probably like 3 or 4 when I first started going to regularly going to his classes. And honestly, it was just a way of like me. He would go to classes with our cousins as well, and it was just a way for me to see my cousins and have a good time. And of course, I think I enjoyed listening to music ever since I can remember. But I think the passion to kind of pick up the songs was just something I did because my brother did it. It's not necessarily that I necessarily wanted to learn music. I think it was just, oh, my brother's doing this. As a younger sibling, I have to copy what he's doing as well. So I think that's kind of how it started, but I don't necessarily know if I went in with the intention of, oh, I need to learn music. It was just kind of a younger sibling copying the older one type of thing. So,
But I mean, even just looking at your early videos, like you clearly had like a really strong inclination for, singing even from the very beginning, right? There's this video of you on Instagram singing Bahimamshi at age 6. But like you're nailing all of the swarams properly. I'm just like, whoa. Like, did it sort of come natural to you from early on, or was it something that sort of built up over time?
Yeah, I think I think the biggest thing, even now as a musician, is just listening to a lot of music is really helpful. And I think because I grew up in a household where music was always being played, not necessarily just Carnatic music, but all kinds of music was being played all the time, I just had it around me all the time. And I think that really helped me kind of pick up an ear for music as well. In terms of like gamakams and swarams and that kind of thing, I think I owe all of that to my teachers. To be honest, at a young age, I don't know if I did it fully well, but I had parents who knew how to guide me in the right way, and I think I'm very grateful for that for sure.
I think in that video as well, it's really interesting. Like you can see your eyes sort of peering towards your mom as like you're looking for like, am I doing this right? Am I?
Absolutely. I think any video you see that I have posted or, I will share in the future of like younger videos, you'll either hear my mom singing in the background or, you'll see me trying to make eye contact with my parents to get that validation of, am I doing this correctly? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of, your early sort of singing journey, something that really struck me as I was sort of going through, your social media and just sort of preparing for this podcast is the concept of discipline. Which is something quite rare in like children and teenagers, at least of a young age, right? Because we all just want to play around and we want to be rebels and, we don't want to listen to our parents and whatnot. But, there's quite a few social media posts of like you sort of like just sort of really putting the idea of discipline out there. And where did that discipline come from? Was it sort of did it come from the self from the very beginning, or was it like initial sort of parental pressure or guidance, and then you sort of picked it up from there? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, and I think I get this question almost every interview that I do. But I think my discipline and my commitment definitely was inculcated by my parents. It was not something, I was not a disciplined kid growing up. I was not, like everyone, like did not want to listen to my parents. I did not want to practice. I think that's just everybody's journey. But I think my parents did a good job of kind of leading me in the right way. I remember when I was younger, especially, there would be days that my friends would have sleepovers or we would have holiday parties or, even like, for example, like my birthday falls on Halloween where everybody's together, all my friends were together. I still remember my parents would always enforce practicing. That was never something that was compromised, regardless of what was happening that day, regardless of what was going on, even on days like Halloween where everybody is celebrating after school. I remember it's not that they would hold me back from those things, but they would make sure that practice is done and then you can live the rest of your life and do whatever you want. And I think I hated it growing up. I really was angry almost at my parents because there were things that I definitely had to sacrifice. I don't call it sacrifice anymore, but there were definitely things that I think I had to give up at the time. That I was very angry at my parents for. But now I look back and I don't think I would have had any kind of commitment or sincerity to the art or the discipline that really a lot of these, especially traditional classical art forms, require if they had not pushed me. So I am super, super grateful to my parents for that. And as much as I hated them growing up, I love them so much more for it now.
And when you're talking about practice, like I think throughout your childhood, you probably have like sort of three main musical commitments, at least early on. You had Carnatic, Hindustani, and Bharatanatyam. Was it sort of doing all three every day, or did you have a focus more on one thing over another?
Yeah, I think actually growing up it was more Carnatic and Bharatanatyam for me.
Okay, fair.
Hindustani was really not in the picture as such.
Mm.
It's only when I came to middle school that I developed a real liking and an interest to know more about Hindustani when I really got exposed to it.
Right.
I've always been exposed to things like ghazals and Sufi music growing up, so I kind of knew what it was, but I never really got the opportunity or took the leap to learn and kind of know more about it until middle school. So I think growing up, at least when I was a younger kid, I was mostly Carnatic and Bharatanatyam, and yeah, practice would happen every day, regardless of what was going on in the rest of my life. So.
Were you a morning practice person or after school kind of thing? Was it like wake up at
Music
5 a.m.?
Yeah, music was definitely a morning thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
My mom till date is like, morning practice is the best, your voice is the best. And now I'm old enough to rebel and not get hate for it. So I practice kind of on my own schedule now. But yeah, dance I think was mostly in the evenings. I don't remember really practicing in the morning as much, but music was definitely in the morning, like early 5 a.m. before school. And I remember my parents, at the time, they used to give me like a time that they were like, 2 hours today, and then you can go to school. So it was kind of like a thing that I had to check off before I went to school. And that became like habit for me because if I, and my mom, there were either two consequences. It's like, A, you're not going to school, which was enjoyable at the time to see your friends and, have a good day. Or B was you don't get to go to music class. And that became a punishment as well. It's like, if you don't practice, you don't get to go to music class. Or if you don't practice, you don't get to go to dance class. So both of those were kind of just tactics that my parents used at the time to get me to practice. But like I said, just very grateful for that, for them really pushing that discipline on me early.
Yeah, this sort of like quasi-bribing tactics is something I've heard from a lot of musicians' parents. I remember I was talking to Sasha Tirupati a while back, and she was talking about she'd practice for like 6 to 8 hours a day. It was absolutely mental.
Wow.
But she'd say, her parents would like withhold pizza from her until she finished.
Wow.
So it's like, whatever works. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think if I ever have kids and that does happen one day and they do go into the arts, that will definitely be that parent. As well.
No pizza for you. You mentioned just now that the question of discipline is something you get asked in every interview. And, staying on that theme of questions you get asked in every interview, the sort of tagline for you in a lot of interviews has been the whole 16 languages at 16 years old aspect.
Yes.
Which is fascinating because I'm curious to know where that comes from. Like, is it just an innate interest towards languages? Is it like a ego boost kind of thing? Or like, I mean, I'm sure it's a combination of a lot of different things, but tell me a little bit about, that sort of mindset which made you want to have that goal of, learning to sing songs in 16 languages by the age of 16.
Yeah. So actually that comes from my background. My parents are actually technically Tamilian, and I say technically Tamilian because we speak Tamil at home. That was the first Indian language that I was exposed to, but my parents never lived in Tamil Nadu and they're not from Tamil Nadu. So I had a lot of different cultural backgrounds, Indian culture, of course, but Indian cultural backgrounds that affected and influenced my kind of base at home, and also just generally how I grew up. So I was exposed to a lot of languages as well. And so I think that really took a huge impact on my ability to pick up languages. And because my parents also know so many languages, it was helpful for me to pick up languages that I wanted to sing that were not necessarily languages that I spoke at the time. And so I can't speak all of these languages for sure, but it's definitely something that I am always trying to expand the number of languages that I can sing in. So I think that's kind of where it came from. And I've always kind of had an inclination to just learn more about different cultures and learn more about different languages. I think also growing up in the US, I had a huge, varied group of friends because I lived in a place where it's basically a melting pot of cultures. And so I didn't always get exposed to only Indian people or only English speaking people. So American, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. But yeah, so I think that kind of really influenced it. Then I think when I was probably 14 at the time, 13, 14-ish, is when I decided, I was like, okay, by 16, I want to learn 16 languages. And I don't think it's something I necessarily was like counting the number of languages that I was learning, but I think by that time I realized, oh, I can sing in quite a few languages, so why not make it like a thing that I'm able to do. And so for my 16th birthday, I remember like learned a couple more languages when I was 14 or 15 and sang in them. And another thing is like, because I sing in so many languages, also another thing is that's very important to me is pronunciation, right? Like we have to give justice and do justice to those languages. So I think that's something that I till date I'm very particular about, is like if I'm learning a new language, I have to be very careful how I'm saying the words and pronouncing the words, and maintaining that essence of whatever language that is. So that's kind of where that came from, is just my background of my parents not being Tamil.
Yeah. No, but I'm sure, like, not only when it comes to pronunciation, but especially in like the Carnatic culture, there's so much emphasis on like understanding the lyrics and, being able to sort of emote what's actually being said literally. So, there's
For
this,
sure.
even if you say, you don't speak the language, there's so much work that goes in to be able to sing in that language. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. But sort of on the theme of, your younger sort of singing days, there's something I found which I didn't know where to fit into the picture of, your musical upbringing, and that's super singer. Uh,
Yeah.
I was trying really hard to find like videos or something. There was absolutely nothing. Google was not cooperative. But apparently you were part of Super Singer.
Yes, I was. It feels like so long ago now. But yes, I was. I was very young. I think I was 8 at the time when I went.
Oh,
I was a Super
really?
Singer junior. Yeah. That's why I say it's a long time ago. But yes, it was an experience. I think being on reality TV is a completely different thing, and also it was my first exposure to the music industry in India as a kid, and I really did not know much. My mom was the one dealing with most of things for me. But that being said, it was a great learning experience. There were so many things that I picked up. There were so many things that I learned along the way. But yeah, most people don't know that, and I don't really fully publicize it also.
Fair enough. That was a different Sindhu. 8-year-old Sindhu was a different person, I
Yeah, that was baby Sindhu for sure.
You're pretty close to baby Sindhu now as well, but
Yeah, I'm not that old, I should say. Don't want to age myself there.
usually I come onto this podcast and everyone else tells me how young I am, and then today's probably the first time I'm interviewing someone younger than me, so then suddenly I'm feeling my age myself. But speaking of learning experiences, you moved to Austin, I think in your early teenage years, and
Mhm.
I read that this was a sort of musical shift for you because it exposed you to a different set of genres, and you've spoken about how jazz and R&B sort of became a sort of more integral part of your musical template. So can you tell me a bit about how that shift to Austin expanded your musical horizons, and I'm sure like your high school activities and like varsity choir and all that fits into that picture as well?
Yeah, for sure. I moved to Austin when I was 13.
Okay.
And that was about 8 years ago. So it's been a while now, but Austin was definitely a huge shift. I think once you grow up in a certain place, and I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and that's kind of where I made my home base and grew my music fully. And then I was kind of uprooted and moved to a different location, and I was really stressed out because I was like, I have to start completely from scratch, my life, but also my music, and my dance. And it was a big like a removal from a place of sorts. It's kind of like moving a plant from one place to another where it already has deep roots, right? And I think something that I am very grateful for is the ability to adapt to change, which I was upset at the time. But I think moving to Austin, where it's considered the world's live music capital, I was exposed to so many different kinds of music that I was never exposed to in Michigan. And that may just be that I was getting older and, exploring more in music, but I think it's also heavily because there's so many musicians from different backgrounds here. And I think that's something I really, really appreciated. Also, it's very close to, South America. So I learned a lot about flamenco and a lot about Latin music, which I had really never been exposed to. I mean, I may have heard of, but never really exposed to in Michigan. So that's something I'm very grateful for. But I think the jazz and R&B that you mentioned is probably because I grew up in the US. So jazz, R&B, and pop are probably like my three genres that I was kind of surrounded with outside of my house.
Right.
Of course, my parents listened to a part of it, but when I was with my friends, there was no talk of Indian classical music. So it was very different. There was like an outside of the house music and inside of the house music kind of thing. And so I think that definitely influenced my ability and appreciation to pick up other kinds of music as well. So yeah, definitely Austin's live music scene is incredible. And also just the Austin music scene has really, really impacted my appreciation for other forms.
The sort of out of home and inside home concept is, I think, something very familiar to any NRI because, the language you speak in, even if you speak in the same language, the accent you speak in, the music you listen to, the type of person you are, sort of, flicks a switch every time you go inside and outside of the house.
Yeah.
How different were these two identities for you? And how was the process of trying to merge that into one person?
Yeah, I think this is probably like the biggest impact identity-wise that has had on both my character and my music, or my arts in general. I grew up in Detroit where now there are a lot of Indians, but when I grew up, there were almost none, especially in the school district that I went to. And then even when I moved to Austin, I was one of the 4 Indian kids in my 1,000 people graduating class.
Oh, wow.
So we were really a minority. And so I think I was always surrounded with people who didn't understand my culture, who didn't understand my background, where my family came from, any of it. And initially, I think when I was a kid and when I was younger, I would try to hide it. I would try to fit in more. I would try to not bring up my culture as much, especially at school or, other activities. But it's only when I got to high school that I really, really took an interest to, break that shell and show people that, my culture is cool too. And it's not that necessarily people don't think your culture is cool. I think they're just not exposed to it as much. So especially with Indian culture, I feel like in Austin, there's more of knowledge for Indian culture generally. But I think in general that Indian American identity has been something I've kind of learned to explore and deal with my entire life. And even now, like if I go to India, it's something that happens naturally now, but I won't speak in an American accent just because I feel like, I'll be kind of like, put in a NRI box or ABCD box. And I think it's like not something I inherently think about and do. It's just something that happens. It's a natural transition that just kind of happens. So even now, my cousins, or some words I say will definitely have an accent. My cousins will still, say, "Oh, you say that so weirdly," or I say literally a lot, and I always get made fun of for that. So, I think definitely having that accent, or even in a lot of my interviews, I naturally, when I speak in English, I have an American accent, and I think some people don't necessarily realize that when they listen to my music or they see me dance, that if I open my mouth, I would sound like an American. And so that's something that I think I have kind of grappled with my entire life. And that also kind of translates in my music. I think now is when I've really started to explore more of the American side of me, my American influences of my upbringing in my music as well, which you can probably see a little bit more of in Ravaan as well. But yeah, I kind of didn't touch that at all. I didn't really give importance to it at all growing up, and then only when I came to high school, I was like, oh, it's kind of cool. I like my identity. I like that I have these two worlds that I can bring together, and sometimes it is still confusing, I would say, to know which one I can, pull more from, but it's a fun identity to have, and I'm grateful for both the backgrounds that I bring. So
Yeah, amidst this sort of identity blurriness, I guess, there was, as I was reading through certain things before this interview, I noticed that there was a sort of clarity that you had about your life even early on. And what I mean by this is, you've spoken in previous interviews about how you wouldn't do like 10 or 15 different activities, and you'd sort of whittle things down to like 3 or 4, like the key activities that you really want to focus on. And like the activities you were doing in high school, if I'm correct, obviously your music and dance commitments, but also, you're a part of this healthcare leadership club, which connects to your profession today. Like there's a clear through line between what you did, in your childhood and what you do today, which suggests you sort of had a clarity of what you wanted to do long term. But like,
Mm.
where did that come from? Like, how were you
Yeah, I
able to
mean,
be, so laser focused?
it's crazy that you say this because just a couple of days ago I was having this conversation with my parents and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Everything is everywhere.
Sometimes the outside and inside can be different, as we've just noticed.
No, it's just funny that you bring this up now because I just had this conversation with my parents. But yeah, no, I mean, I think in terms of not doing multiple activities, absolutely. I was never one to do 10 activities like a lot of my peers in school. I think that a large part of that comes from my parents and their push for quality over quantity, just generally in my life. And I learned to really appreciate that as I grew up because I didn't want to, expend my energy with 10 different things and be, average at all of them. Instead, I wanted to do a few of them and be really, really good at what I do. And I think for a lot of the things, like you build a passion for them, but for music and dance, it's something that has been with me since I can remember. So it's something that I really work to grow in every single day throughout my entire life. So I really don't know a life without my music and dance. So that's something I really put all of my energy into. And then of course, like, little branches here and there with like varsity choir, which still kind of had to do with my music, or even taking like Western vocal lessons, which also had to do with my music, or like learning more about my voice. And even with dance, like I played soccer growing up as well. So I played a sport and like I had that physical activity as well that, every kid played a sport growing up. So I was always active in that way, which also helped my dance because I was staying, physically fit. And then I was in band for a little bit, so I learned how to play the flute. But again, everything kind of ties back to these three big things, three buckets, I would say, in my life, which has been like music, dance, and healthcare. And I don't necessarily know that I had this, like, I wouldn't say I necessarily had this clarity very young. I think it's just something that I knew where my passions lie, and I was like, might as well expend energy where I know that I am enjoying myself rather than doing 100 different things and not really knowing what's going on. I feel like I would be more confused if I did that, to be honest. So I personally I just kind of chose that because that's what my parents initially told me as a kid, which is don't do 100 things, just do 5 or 7 things and
Yeah, yeah.
them. So that's just something I think I learned as a value that I kind of inculcated like as a kid, and then it just kind of translated. But it's amazing to see that you say that I have clarity as a young kid. So I will take it.
And speaking of doing different things throughout high school, something interesting I think for any NRI or NRI musician is inevitably you come to a stage where you're doing both Indian classical music and the sort of Western choral music at the same time, and same for me as well. And personally, it's something I struggled with a little bit because they're two completely different sort of musical identities. You use your voice in completely different ways, and if the two worlds start to merge in unintentional ways, the way you sing starts to get a bit murky. How was the experience for you? Like once, Hindustani came into the picture in middle school, once the sort of Western vocals and choral vocals came into the picture as well, like was there ever a process of like needing to sort of silo these different vocal expressions and be like, okay, Carnatic, I sing this way, Hindustani, I sing this way? Or was it something where you were able to naturally move from one style to another?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I first, I think it kind of started just a little bit before high school when I started being in choir and that kind of thing, middle school, which was middle school is when I started choir, but um, this kind of process started just a little bit before middle school when I started singing more film stuff, and using my voice differently than classical music. And I don't think I necessarily was able to fully tell you the vocal technique that I was using, when I sang film songs versus classical music, where especially in Carnatic music, you have to use that strength. You have to use your chest voice. And I naturally have a lower voice when I sing. So I think generally that was something I realized is like, oh, okay, I have to use my voice slightly differently when I sing film versus, or not even just film, but just like non-classical music versus, Carnatic or Hindustani. Then when it came to choir is when I really understood and really, like increased my knowledge in vocal technique. And I think that's not necessarily something that we are taught inherently in Indian classical music. Of course, my teachers did a great job teaching the music, but I think a lot of the vocal health, the vocal technique, how to use your voice properly, how to modulate your voice, a lot of that came from my Western training. And I think it's when I worked with like my vocal coach when I was in high school, it was kind of a mandatory program that I had to do as part of choir, but that really helped because that's when I really realized, okay, I have to use my voice like this, or this is how it feels when I use my voice in this kind of music. So that's when I really realized the shift between using my voice in different genres. And that's kind of I think I did have to kind of, like you said, silo the way that I use my voice. For choir, I would predominantly use my head voice, or for Carnatic, I would always use my chest voice, and so on and so forth. But I think that's when I really grew to understand how to use the voice. And the voice is, as much as we say the voice is an instrument, I think a lot of us don't take enough time to really understand how to play the instrument, how to use the instrument. It's not something that just happens. You have to learn how to use your voice. And it's not easy. It's a process that will take you probably the rest of your life because your voice is also constantly changing, right? And so I think that's something that's different is like, let's say like a flute, for example, you have a set structure versus a voice is very different. Everybody's voice is different. So to understand your voice will probably take you forever. But that's the beauty of it too, is that you get to experiment with your voice and change it and kind of mold it into what you want it to be. And I think that's really beautiful. But that's kind of where that was my first attempt at learning my voice and trying to use it at different styles. So.
Yeah, I think it's so true about what you say about, vocal culture not being a huge part of the sort of Indian classical training and also it being like a lifelong pursuit. I remember I was talking to someone named Anjana Rajagopalan. You may be familiar. Yeah. And she's sort of taken that mantle of being a sort of vocal culture coach and, training people on how to use their voice. And one of the people she trains is Sanjay Subramaniam, sir.
Oh.
And it's incredible to see, somebody as legendary as that coming back and be like, hey, maybe I need to learn more about how I use my voice. And, sort of coming back to that rudimentary level and sort of building their art based on that again. It's so true what you say about that. And, speaking of your explorations in high school, something you did in high school was not something, everyone does, and that's find an organization or create an organization yourself. Not everybody has that on their resume. And, while you were in high school, you started an organization called Surdarbar, and the website says, I have the exact quote here, that the intent for the organization is, quote, to build an encouraging and supportive music community to interact and network with like-minded individuals, to learn and enhance and promote each other's art. That's a huge mission coming from a high schooler. So, amidst all these other things you were doing, like what was the sort of circumstances which pushed you to start an organization like this? Like, what was the need?
Yeah, I think, like I said, Austin's music culture and the music community here is huge. That being said, the Indian music community is not as huge, as not as, I would say not as big as I had expected for a city like Austin. Um, and there are two big Indian classical organizations that kind of like the the community here, the landscape here, who are doing incredible work and have been around for numerous years. That being said, I felt like for younger artists, for people who are not the Sanjay Subramaniams and Bombay Jayashrees and Janjani Gayatris and Parveen Sultanas of the field, didn't have a space to perform, didn't have a space to explore their art, didn't have a space to make mistakes, didn't have a space to create stuff without the pressure of you have to be excellent, and I think that's something that I wanted to create for myself, but for also other people, because I felt like that was something that I felt like was slightly lacking in the Austin community, and that's kind of why I started Surdat Bar. It's just because I felt there was a lack of something, so I created that for myself and for other people. That being said, I think Surdat Bar the mission has always been to not just be blatant concerts, just plain music concerts. We've always done, kind of more Gen Z like music things. So we had like game shows and we had panel discussions and that kind of thing that really kind of fostered an environment for people to think outside of the box with the music and not lose the essence of our classical music. So that's kind of why I started it. And of course, I think it grew really fast, which I was very surprised to see. But also, we got hit with COVID really quickly after we started it. So that definitely impacted us. But of course, I think the reason that I even started it was just because I felt like I wanted a space for people like me. And I just kind of created that.
So you found a sort of sense of companionship in this community, I presume.
Yeah, I think it helped me also find just other artists in the area, not just in Austin, but it kind of initially the mission was to start in just Austin. It became Austin, Dallas, and Houston, which are the three biggest cities in Texas, and then it became national and then eventually international, which I really never expected for that to happen, but it happened, I guess, with the onset of COVID, which was really nice and we're very grateful for. But it really helped me build a network of people and musicians that I kind of knew and was able to connect with musically and, outside of music as well, but also just create this environment for people to share their work, for people to create and not have the pressure of always, I think when we have a performance, we have a set expectation that, okay, this is what's going to happen. But I wanted to create a space for people to share what they want without that expectation of, okay, you'd honestly come in with no expectation. And that's the best, right? Because then whatever you do, people can either choose to hate it or not hate it. And that's not on you. So that's kind of why I created this space. And yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of, meeting people who, also enjoy the arts, you were part of a group called Hum in college. And to be honest, I didn't really notice the importance of that group until like last night I was watching some of the performances and I was like, whoa, because it seemed to bring in so many different aspects of your early musical upbringing, right? It had the sort of Indian music side of it, it had the Western music side of it, it had the sort of dance and choreo side of it as well. It feels like a sort of culmination of so many different journeys that you had been on, sort of coming together into one place. How much of it was this experience a sort of culmination to you, and how much did it feel like, these different creative journeys melting into one pot?
Yeah, that's again a great question. I think Hum is actually something. So for I guess for people just generally, Hum is a competitive South Asian fusion a cappella team. That was tied to my university that I went to. And so I joined Hum purely out of having a social network in college with people who like to sing, and that was the extent of me even auditioning for the team. I honestly went into college really wanting to be on a dance team, and while I got into dance team, I guess I just never, something about it just kind of led me into joining Hum. And while I joined the team with this intention, very quickly it became something that I poured a lot of my energy and time into, and just really enjoyed myself with, because it was something I had been exposed to a cappella in high school as well, where I was part of an a cappella group for about a year, but this was real a cappella, and this was a cappella with music that I was so familiar with, music that I had grown up with. So it felt very familiar. It felt very familiar in ways that I knew the music, but unfamiliar in ways that I had never arranged before. I had never, you know, thought about soprano, alto, tenor, and bass in an Indian song. I'd never thought about it that way. So I think definitely it definitely pulled together all of my upbringing in one, and with choreo as well, because it's a performance, it's a performative act, visually and audio wise. So I think, or musically. It definitely pulled in my dance thing too, because I remember my freshman year when I was first starting, it's like, oh yeah, of course Sindhu can do this, she's a dancer. And then everybody else would have to simplify because, they may not be a dancer, which is not the expectation when you join the team. But that's something I always used to get made fun of. It's like, oh, yeah, of course Sindhu can do the choreo, she's a dancer. So um, that's definitely something that I was able to put a lot of my energy into, and it had a lot of beautiful like return on investments, if you can think of, that I learned to grow as a musician as well. I learned to grow as a person. There were so many things that team gave me, and till date I will always root for them. I will always root for them, but till date I have been their number one supporter. So yeah, I think it's been a wonderful experience to be able to pull all of that together in college. And I really didn't join the team with that intention at all. I joined the team to make some new friends who also sang, and that was about it. So
Where did vocal arrangement come from? Because that's quite, when you're thinking about Carnatic, you're not thinking about vocal layers, right? It's just sort of one singer singing. You don't even really have like an explicit concept of harmony when it comes to Carnatic. I know you had some exposure with the choirs throughout, middle and high school, but this seems like a much more sort of hands-on experience with, something like vocal arrangement. How's that journey?
it was amazing. It was also really hard, because a cappella is with no instruments. And for all I can remember my entire life, music for me meant vocal and instruments, right? So I think it was kind of unfamiliar territory that I had stepped into. And initially I was like, okay, this is fun. And this is, it's interesting. But I think only once I really started to get into the arrangement process is when I realized, I was like, oh my God, this is really hard. And this is really unfamiliar for me. And at the time I was kind of like almost down about it, because I was like, why don't I know how to do this? Like, I've done music my entire life and I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to put this vocal line on a piece of sheet music. Like, it seems simple, but it's not. And so I think that's something that I really grew into. I think it took a lot of time. And singing in an ensemble definitely changes the way that you view music, but also the way that you understand vocal music. And as much as, growing up, I had sang with bands and I had performed concerts with other people. Singing in an ensemble that you work on the entire year for a competition is a completely different thing, because your sound is something that you're working towards. It's what you're refining on a daily basis. So I think that really added a new dimension to how I approach music, both in sound and with collaboration, because understanding how to put together arrangements was not something I was familiar with at all. So I think I really learned a lot about, the harmonies, vocals, how to blend different vocal textures. All of that was a huge thing. And I think the last 2 years is when I really got into it the most. And the last year I was like the music director, and that was when I really I was in front of everyone, being able to direct everyone. And that was when I really, I think, learned the most, in terms of like leading a group like this with different textures and different sounds. So
Yeah, I think, that's something I can relate to so much, where, when you think about a sound as an ensemble versus a solo singer, like sort of two completely opposite ends of the spectrum in some ways. Because I remember it was interesting. I was in this choir for a couple of years, and in the early years was when we had all the best singers, like best solo singers. Ironically, it was after they left that the group sounded more cohesive. And I'm sure for you, it must have been a sort of different way of thinking about it, because you have to listen to the full sound rather than, listen to, oh, is this singer, sort of expressing them. Of course, like you want each individual singer to sing their part, but also it has to fit in within that overall picture, right?
Yeah, and I think I had been part of I had been part of this thing called the Carnatic Music Choir when I was growing up,
Mm.
and it was something that I did. It was actually Neveli Santana Gopalan sir's initiative,
Oh, okay.
and that I did when I was really probably in middle school. I think middle school, elementary, maybe. But that was my first introduction into choral music or like singing as an ensemble for Carnatic music. But with that, each individual singer had to be, stellar before the overall sound could be good. Because for a form like Carnatic music, if you don't sing a gamakam properly, if you don't sing even one note properly, it messes up the whole thing, right? You can clearly hear that somebody made a mistake. Versus when it comes to something like a cappella, where you're singing oohs and ahs and rarely really singing the words or the lyrics of the song, unless you're the soloist. The blend is what matters more.
Yeah.
It's not that, oh, you messed up this one transition from this note to this note. It's really about how are you overall sounding? How does your tone fit with other people? And so that's something it was almost like kind of unlearning what I had known to be, the way to go about choral or like ensemble music. And so I think that's something that I kind of struggled with at first, which was like, oh, you're singing this wrong. You need to like fix this. But then I really later realized I was like, no, it's really not that. It's like the tone of the entire group. Like even if we just take the sopranos, there are 4 sopranos. They have to sound like one. And that is really hard to attain. But that's something that was challenging, and that kind of challenged my ability as a musician to be like, okay, how do I get these 4 people to sound the same when individually they sound like vastly different as musicians? So it was fun and it was challenging, but I think that was my first real exposure to vocal arrangement.
Yeah, and I can imagine because, when you're trying to put like groups together, I've sort of arranged for a cappella as well. And, when you're sort of listening to everyone, even like when you like when you switch to people or, you change the placement of like where the sopranos are, where the tenors are, whatever, like the whole sound vastly changes. And sort of putting that together with all the choreo that you're doing, it must have been like a real sort of balance you have to strike between, ensuring that you maintain the sound while still, doing the performative sort of quasi dancing sort of thing that you were doing, right?
Yeah. No, that was definitely a challenge. And I mean, of course, I'd done music and dance my entire life.
Yeah.
I'd never done them together till I came to college, and I was like, oh my God, this requires a whole different skill. And I think initially, all of us that join the team don't really understand how much it takes to, myself included, to have the combination of both physical movement and also sing. And sing well and properly, because if you mess up, everybody messes up. And so I think that was something that we all kind of initially struggled with our first years on the team. Of course, it came naturally. Some people, again, myself not included, but I think it's definitely something that I thought was a beautiful process because it introduced me to a different way of singing, and that's kind of what they do on like things like Broadway, where they're constantly moving, they're constantly singing as they're moving, and it takes a different level of skill. Even, people like of our generation are now starting to have more of like a performance aspect to their shows. Like, let's say Jonita Gandhi, for example, she's singing and dancing at the same time. So that's a completely different skill, which I don't feel like a lot of us have tapped into yet. But I was fortunate to get that like a hint of that experience with my a cappella experience.
Speaking of, creative experiences and creative explorations, the Berklee Indian Ensemble. It is one of the finest musical groups on the planet, probably. And you've been touring with them as the lead vocalist for the past 1 or 2 years. That must be quite crazy. Like, could you tell me a little bit about sort of the experiences and sort of learnings from working with them?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I should say I'm very grateful to be part of the Berklee Indian Ensemble. They have, like you said, they are a fine group of musicians and artists, and I think initially I felt a lot of imposter syndrome, honestly. Like, I don't know, I'm this 18-year-old kid. Or actually, I think I was 17 at the time when I joined them. 17, 18, and I was like, I am the youngest kid here. I'm the only kid here. But I think I felt a lot of imposter syndrome when I first joined, and it almost felt like I didn't deserve to be in a place where these Grammy-nominated musicians are working together and making music and arranging, and it was a huge learning curve for me. I think just emotionally, but also musically, and so that was one thing. But I think musically, it has been one of the most rewarding experiences I have ever gotten in my life. For numerous reasons. I think the biggest one has been I have collaborated with so many non-Indian musicians, and that has been an incredible experience because at first I think I was a little unsure of how to work around it because I had always known and worked with people who understood my music, who understood my background, who understood what it meant to say a swaram or a gamakam or, talam or words that I had kind of grown up with and were part of my dictionary. But when I had to explain it to people who didn't understand where I was coming from, that was a whole different ballgame for me. And so I think that was a huge, huge part of my learnings as well. And I just think every musician should be able to work with people who cannot speak their language, who cannot understand the kind of music that they do, who cannot necessarily hear music the way you hear it, because it challenges you to explain your music to other people. And I think that's a skill that so many of us don't get the opportunity to explore. And I think the thing that that's probably the biggest thing that I'm grateful to BIE for is giving me that opportunity to push me outside the box and be like, hey, Sindhu, you need to get it together and explain all these things to people who do not know what's going on. And it's not that they don't understand music. These are stellar musicians who are incredible and have, performed on numerous prestigious stages. It's not about that, but it's about explaining your side of the story and your music to somebody else who may not understand in the way that you do. And it's also the opposite way. If somebody told me, "Oh, can you sing this in in a 6/8?" and I'm like, "In a what?" And so it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me, at least at the time, or even 7/8 for them. I remember we were writing a song in 7/8, and I was like, "Guys, I'm not fully understanding this." And I realized it's just Mr. Chaputalam that I'm putting in
It's just
7/8.
Takita Takadimi.
Exactly. And so I think these are things that, I was exposed to in high school. And that was really my first exposure to like the Western classical or Western theory style. But yeah, no, there's a lot of things that I also learned and I had to learn to grow into and learn to communicate differently with the Berklee Indian Ensemble. And then there's the other side of it was writing music and completely coming up with original ideas. And the Berklee Indian Ensemble is working on our second album right now. And so I don't know if I'm fully allowed to say that. Well, you can know, it's okay. But yeah, we are working on our second album right now, and we've been writing songs and composing songs, and that was another big exposure for me into the composing world, because that was when I was kind of pushed to be like, hey, take this 4 bars of an idea that one of us had and make it a song. And I was like, wait a second. So there was a lot of learning for me there because I had never been put in an environment like that. If there was anything I was composing, it was out of my own brain and my own thoughts and my own experiences. And I thought about it in the way that I wanted to, but to be able to compose and then communicate that to the other musicians and to make it a song eventually was a huge, completely different experience for me. So, yeah, it has been one of the biggest learnings for me. And it has been, I think, the biggest part that I'm grateful for to BIE is for pushing me out of my comfort zone, because I think that's something we don't always get to experience in our music. We always stay in a place that feels comfortable as musicians. And we take the path of least resistance always. But with Berklee, it really they just threw me in the deep end. They're like, you figure it out. So, I was scared. I was very scared initially, but I think now it feels like a different world altogether. And I'm so grateful that I get to call all these people like my best friends and my best, mentors and colleagues and artists that I get to work with. I feel very, very grateful. And I always get bullied because I'm the youngest one in the group and I'm the Gen Z of the group and whatnot. So it's a fun time, but I think there's a lot of learning for me initially, and especially being the youngest one, they would reference people that I may have never heard of, and I was always like learning on the job. So that was something that was very different for me. But Berklee has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life.
I mean, you were talking about how, they throw all these sort of more Western music inclined terms at you, and you sort of had to go through like a mental calculation of like, translating that into sort of language that you're familiar with. But like when it comes to Berklee music, if they say 7/8, they're not sticking to that for so long. Like 3 seconds later, it's changing to something else, right?
That is also true. There's a lot of rhythmic changes. There's a lot of melodic changes that I had never heard. I had never understood, and I didn't know how to do. Like, yeah, maybe I would have been able to sing it, but if you show me on sheet music, I'm like, guys, this makes no sense to me. Can I hear it? And once I hear it, it makes more sense. But for me, I've never been one to look at sheet music and be like, oh yeah, okay, in bar 14, we're changing to 6/8, or we're changing to 3/4, and it makes sense. It never made sense for me like that. I've never seen music on a sheet. So that was something that was also very different for me. But yeah, no, there's always changes, and it's not just in composition or their arrangements, but it's also in the way that we create. I remember I came to the band with a song idea that I had just come up with one day, and I was playing the song idea to them, and that one day we finished the entire song in the span of like 4 or 5 hours. And I was shocked because I was like, this is not something I envisioned at all for this song. It was actually a pretty classically based composition that I had come to the band with. And this composition had really no thought behind it. It is something I sang. I had this idea in the shower, came out, recorded on my phone, and went back in the shower. Like, it was a very quick.
That's how all
idea.
compositions start.
So that's kind of how it happened. But yeah, I think it was a very, like, it took a completely different direction. And I remember telling Yogev, who's the drummer of the band, I was like, dude, how do you come up with this when you listen to this? Because when I listen to this, I do not hear it in this way. This is not how I would have envisioned this composition at all. But it turned into like this Indian rock-esque composition. And I was like, whoa, I was not expecting this. I was expecting like tabla and like harmonium and maybe like a sarangi. So that was kind of what I was hearing. But I think that the difference in our ability to hear music has been so rewarding to see. That's something I really appreciate in our way of composing and creating music also. So yeah.
There's probably a process of letting go that needs to happen there, right? If you bring them a song where in your mind you've imagined it with this tabla sarangi kind of thing, and then Yogev starts throwing in his math rock patterns. There's probably a sort of mental detachment, or at least a sort of mental flexibility that you need to develop, right? Where you're like, okay, let's see how this goes, instead of being like, no, that's not how I envisioned it. Don't.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think, and it's something we talk about all the time because, so another thing is Rohit and I, Rohit is the other vocalist on the band, we come from heavily Carnatic backgrounds, and that was our first introduction to music, which means that we also hear things in a very different way that Yogev, who has no Carnatic influence in his background, hears it, right? And I'm just taking Yogev as an example.
Yeah,
but, there are other musicians in the band that don't have Indian influence in their music. But to be able to adapt and have an open mind is a huge thing as a musician. And I think that's something that I think Berklee is incredible at doing, is like, you come with your idea, but what your idea turns out to be can be vastly different from what you envisioned it being in the beginning. And to be honest, at least with the song idea that I was mentioning, I didn't expect for this song I didn't really have any hopes, or I didn't really think about I didn't give much thought to the song. This was really just a voice memo sitting in my phone, and I'd done nothing with it for months. So I was like, I might as well share it with the band when we all met up. But yeah, I think the process of letting go of your expectation of what you want music to sound like and what you expect it's not just your own ideas, but just generally how music sounds. You kind of have to, it's this tug of war almost of like, oh, okay, let's do this. Let's do one of your ideas. And then we'll also incorporate my idea, maybe in another song, or maybe later in this song, or maybe later in this arrangement, or for whatever it may be. I think it's definitely, I would never call it a sacrifice, but it's definitely a compromise of like, okay, I like my idea and I also like your idea. So let's kind of find a middle ground between the two. And I think that's something I experienced with a cappella, with the difference of ideas, with Berklee, with difference of ideas. But I think as a musician, that's something we're always experiencing. It's just, you can't be married to too many of your ideas because music is something that, we're all seeing and experiencing differently. So it really depends on who you're working with. Like, even if I brought the same idea to, let's say, the Anil Dvarma Collective, for example, another wonderful band out there, they may have envisioned it the same way that I may have because their backgrounds were the same. So, yeah, it's really just about letting go and coming in with an open mind that, hey, this is my idea, but this could be something completely different. And I can't be married to the idea of what I came in with. So, yeah.
Speaking of your own ideas and your own musical creations, you're a composer. And you sort of reached a sort of major checkpoint in your journey as an independent artist as you just released an album called Ravaan. And what's so interesting about this is it's a huge departure from the music you had been writing previously. You had sort of released music with your brother, but that was very much in a sort of R&B, pop, lo-fi kind of zone. And this just leans in completely to, the Hindustani, the Qawwali, and sort of integrating aspects of, soft rock or grunge music or whatever, but still sort of maintaining that core of, I guess, primarily North Indian traditional music. Tell me a little bit about, your approach towards making this album and like where was your head at? What were you looking to do with this?
Yeah. So actually, Ravaan came out of, it was not an idea that had even been brought up when we had started working on the songs. So Rishabh, who is the producer of this album, is a Berklee alum. And I met him through Instagram, and we were friends through music. And then I eventually started working for Berklee. So I went to Boston often, and I got to see him often. And we would sing together and jam together. And for one of his projects at school, he had to produce something. So he asked me if I wanted to sing for one of his productions. And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, fine. It was just one of those things that, your friend is asking you to help them for something small and it'll be fun to work on, right? So I said yes. And that's our song Kash, which we did for his project. And we did that project, and I was like, Rishabh, this is like us just like hanging around and like screwing around like with music and whatever. And I was like, dude, it would be kind of fun to like do an album. And he was like, yeah, actually. And it came out of literally no thought, zero thoughts. And so, yeah, we were like, yeah, sure. And neither of us did anything or said anything about it for a few months after that. And honestly, it was never mentioned after that for a few months. And we finished Kash, and then he's like, Sindhu, I have one more project I have to do before I graduate. And that became Hangama. And so one by one, the songs are kind of created. So we did Kash. I really liked Kash, actually. That was one of the songs that I grew up listening to, and it's really, really close to my heart. So that's it's like a baby. And I actually recorded that song. We didn't change the vocals, actually. I recorded that song when I was 19, and we left the vocals as is.
Okay.
And so, yeah. And so it's been a few years now. But I think if you listen closely enough, you'll be able to tell that Kash sounds a little bit more baby than I sound now. But yeah, so that's how Kash happened. And then Hangama was another project. Actually, Hangama, we didn't fully complete for his project, but we ended up doing it. And we were like, okay, at this point, we had kind of decided that we wanted to put out music and wanted to do an album. So that's when we started seriously working on Hangama. And Hangama did not sound even close to what it sounds like today when we started it. It was a pure like ghazal when we first started it. It was a pure like tabla, violin, like very traditional sounding ghazal. And Ghulam Ali is one of my absolute favorites ghazal singers. And so when we started this, I was like, we shouldn't change, we shouldn't, stray away from the original traditional sound. Then, we started doing more and more sessions for the EP, and we started working on Nadia and whatnot. And that's when I was like, dude, honestly, and Rishabh had actually made a different version of Hangama, which I didn't even know about actually at the time. But he was just like having fun and like producing something different, and he made like a very rock grunge heavy Hangama version. And I was like, dude, initially I was like, this is not good, Rishabh. Like this at all. I was like, this is not good. We're not putting this out. Like, no chance. And he was like, okay, but like, it's just something different. And so in my mind, I was like, of course, we can't stray away from like this traditional, nice, beautiful, like elegant sounding song. And then it really grew on me. And I think like a couple weeks later, when I came back to Austin, I was like, Rishabh, we should revisit your like rock version of Hangama. And he was like, oh, now you came back to it. So we went back to it, and that was how Hangama came about. And it turned into this massive rock grunge, like just heavy, almost, no, I wouldn't say heavy metal, but it had kind of some elements of it in Hangama, and people are loving Hangama of all songs, which I was like, wow, okay, like maybe we were actually right to do that. But that's how Hangama came about. The Nadia is a song that actually came up after a heartbreak that I had.
Oh no. But it's okay. All pain leads to good music, so.
Yes. But it was like it's not like a sad song, it's just a bittersweet song. And so that's when I was like, okay, I want to start writing some original music. And this was always kind of a thought that I had shared with Rishabh, and we had talked about making some more original music rather than recreating already existing compositions. And that's kind of how Nadia happened. But Nadia was such a complex, true representation of Berklee mind, like it changes keys 6 times, the tempo changes in the middle, like there's just so much Berklee influence in that song, I would say, or just like complex, like nerdy musician influence in that song. So definitely Nadia was one of those like very intricate songs. And that was the first single that we put out of the EP. And then Aadat, of course, is like the fun, happy, communal Qawwali song, which we really enjoyed making. But that was also the quickest song. That song was probably made out of like 2 months of work versus other songs were made over years. So, yeah, I think it's just, it kind of shows for our like experience in our creative process and how it's so different for different songs. Sometimes, you click, and with one composition, you're just running. I remember Aadat, they had completely composed in about 40 minutes. And I was kind of shocked because Aadat has a lot of layers to it, and it has a lot of like different things to it. Versus Nadia, which took me a lot longer to come up with, but it was something that I knew better. It was a kind of style or kind of composition that I knew better. It was in a ragam that I knew better, Madhuvanti.
Yeah.
So all of these things, I was like really surprising myself with these things, because a lot of the times as a composer, you have ideas, and then where your ideas go can either, at least for me, takes 2 routes. It's either A, you sit on it for 6 months until you hate it, or B has 2 options again, where it's you work on it for a few months and it starts to kind of make its way into a song eventually, or the other option where you hear this idea, or you come up with this idea, and within a few weeks you have like a full-blown song. You've recorded it, you finished it, it's done, it's ready to go, and so I think it's very different for me composing, especially for myself, because I don't have a timeline necessarily. You can, as a composer, when you're an independent artist, you're not putting yourself on a timeline necessarily. So I gave myself the time to create, and once I had the 3 songs, I had Nadia, Hangama, and Gosh completely done, and I was sitting on them honestly for a long time. But then I wanted one more track to kind of give it, pull it together. And that was Aadat. And Aadat, like I said, was super fast. Like within a couple of weeks, we were done with the whole thing and recording and whatnot. And I was shocked because I was like, okay, so it took me so long to get these 3 songs done, and then this one just kind of happened. And again, Adat is a song that people are absolutely loving, and I think that's something that kind of shocks me because I'm like, sometimes we put in so much work into something and nobody will listen to it. Like Nadia, or there are other songs like Hangama or Adat, where you're spending almost no time on it and everybody loves it. So it's kind of just like that creative process. And I think I've really grown as a composer through this entire process of creating an EP. And I hope to grow more and explore more. But the whole point of this EP was to kind of find what my sound wanted to be. And I think that kind of comes back to your point where you said my first EP, my first album with my brother, which almost no one knows about. But
It took a while to find it, not gonna lie.
yeah, most people don't find it, which in many worlds my brother and I are very grateful for, because that came out of our COVID boredom in my brother's bedroom. But yeah, that was completely like lo-fi pop R&B influenced, and Ravaan was kind of what I think my sound is like right now. And actually, Ravaan as a title means in motion, and so the concept of this album was taking a snapshot of what I sound like as an artist in the motion of my big creative journey. And so that's kind of why I named it Ravaan as well. And that's kind of why it kind of happened that way, is that it's just a small part of what I sound like as an artist right now in motion. So that's kind of where it came from. But I know that was a long, widely blown answer to your simple question. But yeah, Ravaan was a huge learning experience for me.
Suddenly the album art makes so much more sense after your explanation, because
Yeah.
it's an image of you in a sort of snapshot with a sort of like blurry surrounding as everything else is moving. Very cool. I
Yeah.
was talking to a guitarist named Chris Jason recently. He works mainly in the Tamil industry, and he was saying, the best thing about independent music is when all aspects of the creation sort of follow the same through line. So the music, the album art, even the way you promote the work, like they all come from the same space. And like suddenly it clicked to me at that moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, everything makes sense now.
Yeah, I think people were really confused when I first put the the album cover out. They were like, what is this? And another thing is, people didn't realize that all of those versions are me. All of them are different versions of me. And
Wait, what?
well,
Hold
yeah, so
on.
every one of the people, every one of the individuals in the picture is just me wearing a different outfit.
Oh my gosh. I thought you just like took an aerial shot on like a crossing or something.
Yeah, so actually the vision was to do that.
Right.
But my brother is a professional photographer, and so he was the one that kind of conceptualized this whole thing and was like, "Hey, it'd be really cool if you like wore different outfits and things that kind of represented you." So you can see in one, I'm wearing malipu around my hair, which represents like my Carnatic classical background. In one of them, you can see I'm wearing like jeans and a top, which kind of represents my like American identity. One of them is like an Indo-Western outfit, kind of combining both of them. So each of them has a each of the individuals in the picture has a significance to the bigger identity that I am. But I think it's the whole concept was a snapshot of me in motion and my artistic journey in motion. And that's kind of why the name came about, and that's how the album art came about. So all of it has a larger significance, but I think a lot of people didn't really realize that, especially in the beginning. So
This is worth publicizing. This is super cool. I love it when like you discover these like small, because you know better than anyone. Like there's so much heart that goes into putting out an album, and on the listener, I think we're guilty of sort of consuming it a bit too casually. We just sort of listen to it on the train ride, with like all this surrounding sound, and we're like, oh, it's nice. Okay, bye.
yeah.
But then suddenly when you hear from the creator, in this case you realize how all these different seeds sort of come together to create this wonderful whole. So yeah, wow. And I can relate because everyone's album art has a backstory. So
Of course. Yeah. I think I like, and this was my first experience like completely being able to dictate exactly what I wanted. And my brother has always been my go-to person for anything design and photography related. So he's the one that designs everything for me. He's the one that takes photos and videos of everything for me. But with this, I came to him with a vision, and that vision just blossomed so beautifully. And I think that's something I'm very grateful for, is that I get to work with my brother who understands my visions in anything I do. And he took it from, this blank Pinterest board that I gave him to, something that was completely like representative of what this album was. So yeah, definitely. I think a lot of us tend to kind of just like swipe past or, go past a lot of these things that we don't necessarily take time to realize. And it's not our fault either. Like, we're all in this fast moving social media world, but yeah, definitely, like, a lot of time and effort and consideration goes into, and thought goes into creation in general.
Yeah, and you're talking about this album being about, you being in motion. And, speaking of motion and sort of moving forwards, what is in store for you in the future? Like, you mentioned the second Berklee album, of course, but is there anything else we can look forward to, or, we should stay tuned for?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on a lot of independent music at the moment and writing a lot more. I think Ravaan was just the start of a lot more independent work. And I'm always looking to collaborate with new artists. But in a bigger picture, I'm hoping to be a full-time musician, hopefully soon, and be able to do this full-time and really be able to give my full energy to this. And of course, in the meantime, I will continue posting on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook and whatnot. But yeah, that's kind of what's in store. I'm also working on a dance production right now that will be featured next April in Austin. So.
Oh, wow. So, like, when you say you created the dance production, like, did like the ideas come from you, or like in what capacity were you sort of involved in this?
Yeah, so we got like a group of dancers together and we kind of conceptualized the theme that we wanted. And so once the theme is set, we start on picking the music and the choreography starts. And so we did one last year as well. It was called Draupadi.
Ah, yes, yes.
Yeah, but we're doing another one next year. So that it's a group effort for sure, but I think a lot of the ideas, the music creation, all of that, and again, like, very rarely do we find someone who's equally invested in music and dance. And so I always get pushed. And if I'm doing a dance project, it's like, oh, Sindhu could do the music. Or if I'm doing a music project, it's like, Sindhu can do the choreography. So it just kind of naturally happens that way. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment. But in a bigger picture, just working to make all of these artistic endeavors my full-time career soon.
And when you mentioned, trying to get all of your artistic endeavors into a full-time career, but when you mentioned, that you want to be a full-time musician, do you have an idea of like what you want to do, or is it just like, hey, I can do a million different things, like let me do all of them and just, be able to pay the bills?
I think I'm still kind of figuring it out. I don't think I have a full answer for that. And I think a lot of people, also, as another thing is, like, a lot of people think I'm much older than I am, but I just graduated college and I'm just figuring out the adulting world. So, yeah, I think I'm trying to still figure out what exactly I want from that full-time career. I still would love to be doing recordings and films and that kind of thing, as well as releasing my own independent music. So, but I do think I have always been one to be working on multiple different projects at the same time. That's just kind of how my life has always been. And then, at a certain given point, you're always focused on one thing. And also having a completely different healthcare job outside of all of this is like a completely different life as well. So, I kind of have always played this like Hannah Montana dual worlds situation life, but I think being able to do different things is always something I have appreciated and I like doing. So I think I will, in some capacity, be still doing that when I do get to transition to this full time. But yeah, I'm still figuring it out. That's the short answer. Is that I'm still figuring it out. I'm not fully sure.
Fair enough. We're all figuring it out. Don't worry. No matter what it looks like from the outside. So, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I like to end my podcast with one final question, and it's an interesting question to ask you because I know, for you there won't be like a single set of answers, but I'll ask you anyways. It's part of our tradition, and every podcast we end with a question that's 4 words. What's on your playlist?
Oh my gosh. God, my music listening is so varied. Okay. I have, okay. I'll give you like my top 5, I
Okay.
guess. One of them is Wavy by Karan Aujla. Love him.
Oh yeah.
He's like my gym going friend. Love listening to Karan Aujla. Second one is probably Tere Ishq Mein by
Oh yeah.
Lodge. One of my like all-time favorite songs, something I grew up listening to. Another one is probably anything by Frank Ocean, but lately I've been listening to Swim Good a lot by Frank Ocean. So
Okay.
that's probably one of them. And then anything, I think
We're sort of generalizing our answers as we go down the list.
yeah, oh my gosh. Anything by I was just about to say anything by Adam on.
Come on, that's cheating now.
I think Kandukunin album in general has
Yeah.
definitely been something that's on repeat for me. And then the last one, I think I've been listening to a lot of jazz lately. So
Oh, okay.
something by Aretha Franklin or John Coltrane. Is probably my last one, but these are just kind of like recent listens. But
Yeah.
I listen to just so many different things, so it's really hard for me to say what's on my playlist. I have too many playlists.
I heard you have like a different playlist for every different mood.
Oh my God, yes. I have a playlist for everything. I have a playlist for every different mood that I have ever felt in my life. So I am known for my playlist. People know that like playlists are my love language. I will make playlists for people. So yeah, definitely I have way too many playlists is the answer.
Well, you made one for all of us, although we'll have to fit like Raman's 1,500 songs in there somehow. But anyways, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the
Likewise.
time. And I mean, it's incredible the amount of ability you have, and what you've shared to the world is clearly just the beginning. So I, alongside so many others, we're so excited to see how your journey progresses from here, and we're looking forward to sharing hearing more of your music, and you sharing more of your talents, both in music and otherwise within dance and other mediums as well. So yeah,
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you as well.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll put all of the social media links if by chance they're not following you. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that was Sindhu Vasudevan on our 31st episode of the Indoencers Podcast. And thank you to everyone that has tuned in. You can find us at the Indoencers on the usual social platforms, or you can use the links in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the Indoencers Podcast on your favorite podcasting platforms for more conversations with artists around India. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time.